The cold bit through Nadia's thin dress like teeth, but she barely felt it anymore. She knelt in the snow at the boundary markers, one trembling hand pressed against her belly where new life grew in secret, the other clutching the rough bark of a pine tree to keep herself upright. Blood dripped from her split lip onto the pristine white snow, each crimson drop a stark reminder of how thoroughly her world had shattered in the space of a single night, her wedding night. The thought made bile rise in her throat. Hours ago, was it only hours? It felt like years. She'd stood in the great hall of the Frostborn pack house wearing a dress of silver silk, her dark hair woven with winter flowers, her heart hammering with nervous joy as she waited for Wulfric to complete the mating ceremony. She'd loved him since they were children, had felt the bond snap into place on her 18th birthday, with such overwhelming certainty that she'd wept with gratitude. 3 years of courtship, of his hands in her hair, and his promises whispered against her skin, of planning their future together. All of it a lie. She could still hear his voice echoing through the hall, cold and precise, as he'd address the assembled pack. I, Wulfric Frostborn, Alpha of the Northern Reach, hereby reject Nadia Darkhollow as my mate and Luna. The words had hit her like physical blows, driving the air from her lungs. She'd stumbled backward, her wolf howling in confusion and denial, unable to comprehend what was happening. The bond between us is severed. I claim it no more. The pain had been immediate and catastrophic. She'd felt the bond burning away like paper in a flame, the golden thread that connected her soul to his turning to ash and acid in her veins. Her wolf had screamed, a sound of such raw agony that several pack members had flinched. She'd collapsed to her knees on the stone floor, her hands clutching at her chest as if she could hold the pieces of herself together through sheer will. Why? The word had torn from her throat. Barely human. Wulfric. Why? He'd looked at her then, his ice-blue eyes flat and empty of anything resembling the warmth she'd once believed she saw there. Because you're weak, Nadia. Your bloodline is diluted, your wolf barely stronger than an Omega's. I need a Luna who can stand beside me in strength, not one I'll have to protect from every challenge. He'd turned to the woman standing at his right hand, Kira Silvermane, daughter of the Western Ridge Alpha, tall and golden and everything Nadia was not. Kira has agreed to be my mate and Luna. Our bond will strengthen both our packs. The betrayal had been a second wound, opening fresh and deep. Kira had been her friend, or so she'd thought. They'd trained together, shared meals, laughed over foolish things the way young women did. And all the while, Kira had been waiting to take everything Nadia held dear. Please. She'd reached toward Wulfric, her hand shaking. Please, I can be stronger. I'll train harder, It's done, Nadia. His voice had carried no emotion at all, as if he were discussing the weather. Guards, escort her to the border. She's no longer welcome in Frostborn territory. She'd tried to speak, to tell him about the child growing inside her. His child, conceived just weeks ago in what she'd foolishly believed was love. But rough hands had seized her arms, dragging her from the hall even as she struggled. She'd caught one last glimpse of Wulfric pulling Kira into his arms, his mouth descending on hers with a hunger he'd never shown Nadia, and then the doors had slammed shut. The guards had been neither gentle nor kind. They'd hauled her through the pack house, ignoring her pleas, deaf to her tears. At the edge of Packlands, they'd shoved her forward hard enough that she'd fallen, her palms scraping against frozen ground. The Alpha says you have until dawn to be gone from our borders, the lead guard had said, his voice gruff but not entirely unkind. After that, you'll be considered a rogue, and we'll hunt you like one. But I have nothing, she'd whispered, looking down at herself. The silver wedding dress, now torn and stained. No coat, no shoes, no supplies. Where am I supposed to go? The guard had hesitated, something like pity flickering in his eyes. Then he'd hardened his expression and turned away. That's not our concern anymore. You're not pack. Go. so she'd run. The winter forest was a maze of shadows and snow, every tree looking like the next, the darkness absolute beneath the bare branches. Her feet, clad only in thin slippers meant for dancing, had gone numb within minutes. She'd stumbled over roots and rocks she couldn't see, her breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to white clouds in the frigid air. Her wolf, still reeling from the severed bond, could barely surface. The animal part of her that should have guided her through the wilderness was curled up in agony, whimpering like a wounded pup. So Nadia ran on human instinct alone, driven by pure survival instinct and the desperate need to protect the life she carried. She didn't know how long she'd been running when her foot caught on a hidden root, and she went down hard. Pain exploded through her knee as it struck a half-buried stone, bright and sharp enough to cut through the numbness. She'd lain there in the snow for long moments, gasping, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Get up. You have to get up. She'd forced herself to her hands and knees, then to her feet, limping now, leaving a trail of blood drops in the snow behind her. The forest seemed endless, a frozen hell that would swallow her whole. Maybe that would be better. Maybe she should just lie down in the snow and let the cold take her, end this suffering before it could truly begin. Her hand had moved to her belly again, an instinctive protective gesture. No, not just for herself anymore. She'd pushed forward, step by agonizing step, until she'd seen them through the trees. Tall wooden posts carved with symbols she recognized. Boundary markers. She'd crossed into someone else's territory without even realizing it. And that was where her strength had finally given out. Now she knelt at those markers, her body shaking with cold and shock, her mind drifting in and out of clarity. She should move. She should hide. Crossing into another pack's territory uninvited was a death sentence for a rogue wolf, and that's what she was now. Packless, bondless, alone. But she couldn't make her legs work anymore. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her thoughts slow and syrupy. She'd heard freezing to death was peaceful at the end. You just went to sleep and didn't wake up. That didn't sound so terrible. Her eyes drifted closed. The sound of footsteps crunching through snow snapped them open again. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with the organized precision of a patrol. She tried to scramble backward, away from the boundary markers, but her body wouldn't obey. She managed only to slump sideways against the carved post, her vision blurring. "Sir, we've got something at the northern markers." The voice was male, authority ringing in every syllable. Not asking, reporting. "What kind of something?" Another voice, deeper, with a quality that made Nadia's battered wolf stir despite her pain. "Female. Looks like she's been through hell. She's bleeding." Silence. Then footsteps approaching, faster now, and Nadia forced her eyes to focus. 3 men emerged from the darkness between the trees, all wearing dark cloaks marked with a silver pine tree. Shadowpine Kingdom. She'd crossed into King Raven's territory. The stories about him flickered through her mind. Ruthless, powerful, a king who'd united 5 warring packs under his rule through strength and cunning. And she was trespassing in his lands. One of the guards knelt beside her, his face blurring in and out of focus. "Miss, can you hear me? What happened to you?" She tried to speak, but only a broken sound emerged. Her hand remained pressed to her belly, the gesture unconscious now. Pure instinct. "She's protecting something," another guard said quietly. "Look at how she's holding herself. Doesn't matter what she's protecting if she freezes to death out here." The first guard reached for her, and Nadia's wolf surged up with a snarl that had no force behind it, a warning that was more plea than threat. "Easy, we're not going to hurt you." His hands were gentle as he lifted her. When had she become so light, cradling her against his chest? "We're taking you to the king's fortress. You need a healer." "No," she managed to whisper, the word barely audible. "Please, can't. He'll kill me." "King Raven doesn't kill refugees seeking shelter." the guard said firmly. Whatever you're running from, you're safe now. I give you my word. His word. What good were words? Wulfric had given her words too, promises and vows and lies wrapped in pretty sounds, but she was too weak to fight, too broken to resist. Her head lolled against the guard's shoulder as he carried her deeper into Shadowpine territory, the boundary markers disappearing behind them. The last thing she saw before consciousness left her entirely was the massive stone fortress rising against the night sky, its towers crowned with torchlight, beautiful and terrible and utterly unforgiving in its strength. She woke to warmth. The sensation was so unexpected that for several heartbeats, she simply lay still, marveling at it. Warmth against her skin, soft fabric beneath her body, the scent of pine and wood smoke in the air. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to dim firelight that flickered from a hearth across the room. A room. Not a cell. Not the cold forest floor. She was lying in a bed, an actual bed with silk sheets and thick furs piled over her. Her wedding dress was gone, replaced by a soft nightgown that smelled of lavender. Someone had cleaned the blood from her face and tended her wounds. Bandages wrapped her scraped palms and her injured knee. Her hand flew to her belly. Still flat. Still secret. Still there. Thank the gods. The room around her was larger than her entire quarters had been in Frostborn's pack house. Stone walls hung with rich tapestries, a fire burning in an ornate hearth, windows with actual glass looking out onto darkness. Where was she? The door opened. Nadia's entire body went rigid, her battered wolf rising to attention despite her exhaustion. A man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of a born predator. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes were a startling amber color that seemed to glow in the firelight. He wore simple dark clothing, but power radiated from him like heat from the sun. Alpha. Every instinct she possessed screamed it. This was an alpha in his prime, dominant and dangerous, and she was alone and vulnerable in his territory. Their eyes met. The world stopped. Something ignited in Nadia's chest, right where the burned bond had left only ash and emptiness. Heat spread through her like liquid gold, filling all the hollow places, her wolf surging forward with a desperate, confused joy that made no sense. No, she tried to tell the animal part of herself. No, we can't. Not again. I can't survive this again. But her wolf was whimpering mate, with absolute certainty, pressing against her consciousness with frantic need. The man's entire body went rigid. His eyes flashed pure gold, the color bleeding through his irises like spilled paint. A low growl rumbled from his chest, primal and involuntary, and she watched his hands come up to grip the doorframe with such force that the wood cracked audibly under his fingers. No, Nadia whispered, the word breaking. No. Please, not this. He crossed the room in 3 strides, moving with impossible speed, and then he was on his knees beside her bed, his large frame somehow making the supplicant position look powerful rather than submissive. His eyes were locked on her face with an intensity that stole her breath. He breathed in deeply, and she watched his eyes fall closed as if savoring something exquisite. When he opened them again, his voice was rough, scraped raw with barely controlled need. You're mine. And despite everything, despite Wulfric and the rejection and the pain still etched into her bones, Nadia felt the bond snap into place like a lightning strike, electric and undeniable, a connection forged in fire that lit up every nerve in her body. Her breath caught as warmth flooded through her for the first time since the rejection, chasing away shadows she'd thought would be permanent. The Alpha King, because who else could he be, stared at her as if she was something precious and impossible, his hand still gripping the bed frame as though it was the only thing keeping him from reaching for her. What's your name? His voice was softer now, controlled, but she could hear the wolf beneath the words. Nadia. Her voice trembled. Nadia Dark Hollow. Nadia. He said it like a prayer, like a promise. I'm Raven Duskwalker, and you, Nadia Dark Hollow, are my mate. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable all at once. Nadia stared at the Alpha King kneeling beside her bed, his amber eyes burning with golden fire, his massive frame radiating a heat she could feel even through the space separating them. Every instinct she possessed screamed contradictions: run, stay, hide, surrender. Her wolf was pressing frantically against her consciousness, whining and pawing with desperate joy, trying to push forward and claim what was theirs. But the human part of her, the part that still bled from wounds too fresh to bear, recoiled in pure terror. No. The word came out broken, barely more than a whisper. She pressed herself back against the pillows, her hand instinctively moving to cover her belly. This isn't real. It can't be real. Something flickered in Raven's eyes, understanding perhaps, or pain that mirrored her own. His hands were still gripping the wooden bed frame, knuckles white with the force of his restraint. She could see the tension in every line of his body, the way his jaw clenched as he fought against the bond pulling him toward her. It is real, Nadia. His voice was rough, scraped raw. I know you feel it. Your wolf knows it. My wolf is broken. The words tasted like ash. Everything is broken. You don't want this. You don't want me. Don't tell me what I want. The command in his voice made her wolf whimper with submission and longing, but he immediately softened his tone, as if realizing his mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... He took a breath, visibly gathering control. Tell me what happened to you. Please. She could feel tears burning behind her eyes, threatening to spill over. The bond between them hummed with warmth and promise, everything the connection with Wulfric should have been but never was. This felt different. Stronger. More certain. Like a foundation built on bedrock instead of sand. But that only made it more terrifying, because she knew exactly how much it would destroy her when it inevitably shattered. It doesn't matter what happened, she managed, her voice shaking. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. You should reject me now, before... Stop. The single word cracked through the room like a whip, and she flinched despite herself. Raven's eyes widened, horror flashing across his face at her reaction. He immediately gentled everything about himself. His voice, his posture, even the energy radiating from him softened like a wolf lowering itself before a frightened pup. Nadia, I'm not going to hurt you. I swear on my life, and my crown, I will never hurt you. That's what he said too. The confession escaped before she could stop it, and she watched Raven's entire body go rigid. Who? His voice was deadly quiet now, all the more dangerous for its softness. Who said that to you? She shook her head, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The bond pulsed between them, and she could feel emotions bleeding through it that weren't entirely her own. Rage and protectiveness and a fierce, possessive need that should have frightened her, but instead felt like shelter from a storm. Raven slowly released his grip on the bed frame, moving with exaggerated care as he settled more comfortably on his knees beside the bed. He kept his hands visible, palms up in a gesture of peace, maintaining distance even though she could see how much it cost him. The mate bond was pulling at both of them, demanding physical contact, completion, claiming. But he held himself perfectly still, giving her the space she so desperately needed. You don't have to tell me, he said quietly. Not until you're ready. But I need you to understand something, Nadia Dark Hollow. He waited until she met his eyes again, until she could see the absolute certainty burning in that amber gaze. You are my mate, my true mate. I have been Alpha King of Shadowpine for 7 years, and in all that time, I never felt even a flicker of a bond with anyone. I'd begun to think the gods hadn't made a mate for me. And then, you appeared at my borders, bleeding and broken and so fucking brave that it makes my chest ache just looking at you. I'm not brave. The words came out bitter. Brave people don't let themselves be destroyed so easily. Brave people survive destruction and keep breathing anyway. His voice was fierce now, passionate. You crossed pack borders in the dead of winter wearing nothing but a torn dress. You were hypothermic, injured, clearly fleeing something terrible, and still your first instinct was to protect. His eyes dropped to where her hand rested against her belly, then lifted back to her face with dawning understanding. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. Nadia felt her breath catch, panic flooding through her. This was it. This was when he would change his mind, when the bond would become more trouble than it was worth. What Alpha King wanted a mate carrying another male's child? I'll go. She tried to push herself upright, ignoring the way her injured knee protested. I'm sorry, I should never have come here. I'll leave before dawn, I promise. I just need… Nadia, stop. Raven's hand shot out, hovering just above her arm without making contact. Please, just stop. She froze, trembling, waiting for the rejection she knew was coming. The child. His voice was carefully controlled. Does the father know? She shook her head mutely, tears finally spilling over to track down her cheeks. Do you want him to know? Another head shake, more violent this time. Raven was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. When he spoke again, his words were measured, chosen with obvious care. Then he won't know. Not from me, not from anyone in my pack. You're under my protection now, Nadia. You and your child both. Why? The question burst from her, desperate and confused. Why would you do that? I'm damaged goods. Everyone said so. I'm weak. My bloodline is diluted. My wolf is barely… Your wolf is magnificent. The certainty in his voice stopped her mid-sentence. I can feel her through the bond, Nadia. She's not weak. She's wounded, yes. But there's nothing weak about her. And as for damaged… His jaw clenched. Someone hurt you. Someone broke something extraordinary and irreplaceable. And I will find out who did it and make them pay for every moment of pain they caused you. But you are not damaged. You are not weak. You are my mate. And I will spend every day of the rest of our lives proving it to you, if that's what it takes. The raw honesty in his words stole the breath from her lungs. She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But the wounds Wulfric had left were too fresh, too deep. You don't know me, she whispered. Once you do, you'll change your mind. Then let me know you. He shifted slightly, still maintaining that careful distance. Let me prove that I'm different from whoever hurt you. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Nadia. I'm just asking for a chance. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the hidden cruelty, the moment when the mask would slip and reveal the monster underneath. But all she saw was earnest intensity, fierce protectiveness, and something that looked dangerously close to wonder. Her wolf was howling at her to accept, to throw herself into his arms and let him make everything better. But her human mind held back, terrified and scarred. I don't know how, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to trust again. Then we'll figure it out together. He slowly rose to his feet, moving like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. You're exhausted and you need to rest. I'll have food sent up, and healers to check on you. If there's anything you need, anything at all, you just have to ask. He was halfway to the door when her voice stopped him. Raven? He turned immediately, his entire attention focused on her with an intensity that made her pulse race. Thank you, she managed, for being kind. Something blazed in his eyes, hot and fierce. Kindness is the absolute least of what you deserve, Nadia. I'm going to show you exactly what you deserve. But first, you need to heal. He left then, closing the door softly behind him, and Nadia collapsed back against the pillows, her heart racing. She could still feel the bond thrumming between them, warm and present, and terrifyingly real. She curled inward, shielding the life within her. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the tiny life growing inside her. "I don't know if I can survive being broken again." But even as she said it, she could feel her wolf stirring with something she thought was lost forever. Hope. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the glass windows, turning everything soft and golden. Nadia woke slowly, her body still aching but warm, and rested in a way she couldn't remember feeling in months. For a blessed moment she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened. Then memory crashed back in, and with it came the awareness of the bond humming steadily in her chest. Real. It was all real. A soft knock at the door made her tense. "Come in," she called, her voice hoarse. A young woman entered, carrying a tray laden with food that made Nadia's stomach clench with sudden hunger. The scent of fresh bread and cooked meat filled the room. "Good morning, Luna," the woman said with a respectful bow. "The king asked me to bring you breakfast and see if there's anything you need." Luna. The title made Nadia's chest tighten. She wasn't anyone's Luna. Not anymore. "Just Nadia, please," she said quietly. I'm not a Luna." The young woman smiled gently as she set the tray on the small table beside the bed. "The king says you are, and what the king says in Shadowpine becomes truth." She left before Nadia could argue, closing the door with a soft click. Nadia stared at the food, her stomach warring with her anxiety. When had she last eaten? She couldn't remember. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the bread, tearing off a small piece. It was warm and soft, melting on her tongue, and suddenly she was ravenous. She ate until the tray was nearly empty, feeding both herself and the child growing inside her. She was just finishing when another knock sounded. "Enter," she called, expecting the young servant again. Instead, Raven stepped through the door and the bond flared to life with such intensity that she gasped. He looked different in daylight, no less powerful, but somehow more real. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, revealing sharp features and those extraordinary amber eyes. He wore formal clothing now, a black tunic embroidered with silver thread, looking every inch the Alpha King he was. "I'm sorry for intruding," he said, hovering in the doorway. "I wanted to check on you, make sure you had everything you needed." "I'm fine." She gestured to the empty tray. "The food was wonderful. Thank you." He stepped further into the room, moving with that same careful control he'd shown the night before. "I sent for the pack healers. They should be here within the hour. Just to make sure you're recovering properly." "That's not necessary." "It is to me." His voice was firm but gentle. "Nadia, you were hypothermic when my guards found you. You need proper medical attention." She wanted to argue, but the concern in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't Wulfric's cold dismissal or calculated control. This felt genuine. "All right," she said quietly. "If it would make you feel better." Something like relief flickered across his face. "It would. Thank you." They stared at each other for a long moment, the bond pulling and singing between them. Nadia could feel her wolf pressing forward, wanting to be closer to him, wanting to touch and be touched. The need was becoming physically uncomfortable, but she fought it down. "There's something else," Raven said, his voice careful. "There will be a formal dinner tonight. The council members and visiting alphas will be there. I'd like you to attend." He held up a hand before she could protest. "I know it's soon. I know you're not ready to be presented as Luna, but I want you there. With me. And I want everyone to see that you're under my protection." "I don't have anything to wear," she said, the excuse sounding weak even to her own ears. "I'll have clothing brought to you. Whatever you need." He took a step closer, then stopped himself, his hands clenching at his sides. "Nadia, I'm not going to force you to do anything you're not comfortable with, But there are already whispers about the woman my guards brought in from the borders. I need to make it clear that you're not a prisoner or a refugee. You're my mate." The word sent a shiver through her. Mate. After everything with Wulfric, the word felt both precious and dangerous. "What if I embarrass you?" she whispered. His eyes flashed gold. "That's not possible. You don't know what happened, what was said about me before I came here. Then tell me." He moved closer, slowly, like approaching a frightened animal. "Tell me what was said, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving every word was a lie." She wanted to. Gods, she wanted to pour it all out. The rejection, the humiliation, the way Wulfric had looked at her like she was nothing. But the words stuck in her throat, too painful to speak. "I can't," she breathed. "Not yet." "All right." He accepted it without argument, though she could see how much it cost him. "But will you come tonight? Just for a little while. You can leave whenever you want, I promise." She looked into those amber eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. Her wolf was practically begging her to say yes, to be near him, to start building the bond that fate had forged between them. "I'll come," she heard herself say. The smile that broke across his face was devastating in its genuine joy. "Thank you, Nadia. You won't regret it." As he left, pulling the door closed behind him, Nadia pressed her hand to her chest where the bond hummed warm and steady. She hoped desperately that he was right. The healers arrived exactly when Raven promised they would. 3 stern-faced women in deep green robes who swept into the room with the confidence of those who'd spent decades tending to wolfkind. Nadia sat stiffly on the edge of the bed while they examined her, their hands cool and clinical, as they checked her temperature. Listened to her heart, pressed gently against her ribs where bruises still mottled her skin in shades of purple and yellow. "You're healing well?" the eldest healer said, her silver hair pulled back in a tight braid. "Better than expected, actually. Your wolf must be strong." Nadia didn't respond. Her wolf was strong, or had been, before the rejection. Before Wulfric had torn their bond apart and left her bleeding in the snow. She could feel the creature stirring now, awakening slowly like something emerging from a long hibernation, drawn forward by the new bond that pulsed warm and steady in her chest. The healers exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them that made Nadia's stomach tighten with anxiety. They knew. They had to know. Healers could sense these things, could smell the changes in a woman's body even before she showed visible signs. "There's something else," the youngest healer said, her voice carefully neutral. "We need to examine your abdomen. May we?" Nadia's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective, defensive. The child growing inside her was barely more than a flutter of cells, but already she loved it with a fierceness that frightened her. This baby was all she had left of her old life, the only good thing to come from the disaster of her bond with Wulfric. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, the words dropping into the room like stones into still water. "I know. That's not news to me." The healers' faces remained carefully blank, but she could see the judgment lurking behind their professional masks. A rejected mate, pregnant with another male's child, seeking refuge in their king's territory. What must they think of her? What stories were they already constructing in their minds? "How far along?" the eldest asked. 2 months, maybe a little more." "And the father?" "Gone." The word came out harder than she intended. "He's not in the picture. He never will be." The healers continued their examination in silence, their hands gentle but impersonal as they pressed against her abdomen, listening with that preternatural awareness that came from decades of midwifery. Nadia stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about what this meant. Tried not to imagine the gossip that would spread through the pack like wildfire once word got out. The rejected one. The damaged goods. The charity case carrying another male's bastard. "The child is healthy," the eldest healer finally said, straightening up and smoothing down her robes. "Strong heartbeat. Good development for this stage. You'll need proper nutrition and rest, but there's no reason to expect complications. Does the king know? The youngest asked, her voice sharp with something that might have been disapproval. Nadia met her eyes steadily. He knows. And he's accepting this? That's between me and the king. Nadia's voice came out firmer than she felt, her wolf rising to the surface with a flash of protective anger. She wouldn't let anyone question Raven's choices, wouldn't let them plant seeds of doubt about his decision to keep her here. The healers gathered their supplies in pointed silence, their movements crisp with unspoken opinions. As they reached the door, the eldest turned back, her face softening slightly. "Word of advice, girl," she said quietly. "Whatever protection you think you have here, it won't last if you cause problems for our king. The pack won't tolerate anything that threatens his authority or his future." The door closed behind them with a soft click that felt like a pronouncement. Nadia sat frozen on the bed, their words echoing in her mind. "What protection you think you have here, the pack won't tolerate." As if she was a threat, as if her very presence endangered the stability of this kingdom. She wrapped her arms around herself, cradling the secret she carried. What had she brought into Raven's life? What complications and scandals would follow her here, trailing behind like shadows that refused to fade? The hours until dinner crawled past with agonizing slowness. Servants came and went, bringing clothing that made Nadia's breath catch. Gowns of deep emerald and midnight blue, silk that whispered against her fingers like water, nothing at all like the simple dresses she'd worn in Frostborn Pack. They brought jewelry too, silver and moonstone that glittered in the lamplight, fit for a Luna even though she'd claimed no such title. She chose the simplest gown, a deep blue that brought out the gray in her eyes, and let the servants style her dark hair into a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked almost regal, almost worthy of standing beside an alpha king. Almost. The walk to the dining hall felt like a march to her execution. Nadia's heart hammered against her ribs as a servant guided her through corridors of polished stone, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and legendary hunts. She could hear voices ahead, the low rumble of masculine conversation punctuated by occasional laughter, and her steps faltered. "I can't do this," she whispered. The servant, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, paused and turned to face her. "The king requested your presence, miss. He doesn't make requests lightly." "They're going to judge me. They're going to see exactly what I am. They're going to see what the king wants them to see," the woman interrupted gently. "And he wants them to see his mate." The word sent warmth flooding through her chest, the bond responding to even the mention of what she was to Raven. Her wolf stirred, pressing forward, lending her strength she didn't know she possessed. "All right," Nadia breathed. "All right. I can do this." The servant smiled and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The dining hall fell silent the moment she entered. Every head turned, every conversation died mid-word, and Nadia felt the weight of dozens of eyes assessing her, judging her, measuring her worth. The room was massive, with a table that could seat 50 running down its center, already laden with platters of roasted meat and fresh bread and winter vegetables. Candles flickered in iron chandeliers overhead, casting dancing shadows across stone walls hung with weapons and shields. Raven stood at the far end of the table, and his eyes found hers immediately. The bond flared between them, warm and reassuring, and she watched his entire posture shift, his shoulders straightening, his chin lifting, his expression settling into something fierce and possessive. He crossed the room in long strides that ate up the distance between them, and suddenly he was there, standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hand found the small of her back, gentle but unmistakably claiming. "You came," he said softly, for her ears only. "I promised I would. You look beautiful." The compliment sent heat rushing to her cheeks. Before she could respond, He turned to address the room, his voice carrying that alpha authority that made every wolf instinctively straighten. "This is Nadia Darkhollow," he announced. "She is under my personal protection. Anyone who disrespects her answers to me directly." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions, with speculation and curiosity and, she could smell it, disapproval from several quarters. But no one spoke. No one challenged his declaration, and slowly the conversations resumed, the tension easing by degrees. Raven guided her to a seat near the head of the table, his hand never leaving her back until she was settled. He took the chair beside her rather than the throne-like seat at the table's head, a statement that didn't go unnoticed by the assembled wolves. The dinner progressed in a blur of faces and names Nadia couldn't keep straight. Council members and visiting alphas, warriors and advisors, all of them stealing glances at her when they thought she wasn't looking. She picked at her food, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to manage more than a few bites, hyper-aware of every whispered conversation happening around her. "Heard she was found at the borders? King's never shown interest in anyone before. Wonder what pack she's from." Raven's hand found hers under the table, his fingers lacing through hers in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. The touch sent electricity dancing up her arm, the bond singing with contentment at even this simple contact. "You're doing fine," he murmured, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Just a little longer." Then she smelled him. The scent hit her like a physical blow, pine and ice and the particular musk that meant Wulfric. Her stomach dropped through the floor. The wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the stone, crimson spreading across the table like blood on snow, and suddenly she was back in that hall, kneeling on cold stone while her bond burned away to ash. "No. No. No, no." Her wolf howled with a mixture of rage and primal terror, clawing at her consciousness, screaming warnings that came too late. Nadia's hands began to shake, her vision tunneled. She could feel the phantom pain of the severed bond searing through her wrist, could taste the bile rising in her throat. This was supposed to be safe. This was supposed to be far from everything that had hurt her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch in frozen horror as the dining hall doors swung open. And there he was. Wulfric Frostborn stood in the doorway of the dining hall, flanked by two warriors wearing the ice blue and white of his pack. He was exactly as she remembered, tall and golden-haired, with the kind of classical beauty that had made her heart race when they'd first met. His pale blue eyes swept the room with alpha arrogance before landing on her, and she watched something like satisfaction flicker across his face. "Alpha King Duskwalker," Wulfric said, his voice carrying easily across the sudden silence. "Forgive the intrusion. I've come under the banner of diplomacy, seeking an audience regarding a matter of grave importance." Raven's hand tightened on hers, his body going absolutely still in the way that meant his wolf was very close to the surface. "Alpha Frostborn, this is unexpected. I wasn't aware we had scheduled any formal meetings." "The matter couldn't wait." Wulfric's eyes never left Nadia, his gaze heavy with implications she didn't want to interpret. "It concerns something, someone, who fled my territories several days ago. A matter of theft, you might say. Of stolen property." The words landed like poison, spreading through the assembled wolves with almost visible ripples. Nadia felt Raven's entire body go taut beside her, felt the rage building in him like a gathering storm. "I don't harbor thieves in my territory," Raven said, his voice deadly quiet. "Perhaps you should be more specific about what you believe was stolen." Wulfric's smile was cold and cruel, the expression of a predator who knew he had his prey cornered. "Not what, Alpha King? Who?" His eyes locked on Nadia's, and she felt her blood turn to ice in her veins. "That woman sitting beside you is carrying my child, my heir, and I've come to take back what belongs to me." The dining hall erupted into chaos. The roar of voices washed over Nadia like a physical force, dozens of conversations erupting at once as the assembled wolves processed Wulfric's claim. She felt the blood drain from her face, felt her hands begin to tremble where one still clasped Raven's beneath the table. This was her nightmare made real, the fear that had chased her through every dark moment since she'd fled into the snow. Raven was on his feet in an instant, his chair clattering backward, his massive frame blocking her from Wulfric's view. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as his power rolled out, pressing against every wolf present until even the visiting alphas lowered their eyes in automatic submission. "You will choose your next words very carefully, Frostborn." Raven's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. "Because what you're implying is a challenge to my authority in my own hall." Wulfric raised his hands in a gesture of false conciliation, but his smile never wavered. "I mean no disrespect, Alpha King. I'm simply stating facts. The woman, Nadia Darkhollow, was my betrothed. She fled my territory without permission, carrying my unborn child. Surely you can understand my concern for my heir's welfare?" Betrothed. Raven's laugh was utterly devoid of humor. "Is that what you call the mate you rejected and cast out?" A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the assembly. Rejection was rare, considered by most wolves to be an abomination against the moon goddess herself. Nadia felt every eye in the room turn to her, felt the weight of their judgment and speculation pressing down on her shoulders. "A misunderstanding," Wulfric said smoothly. "A lover's quarrel that got out of hand. I never formally severed our bond. She ran before we could reconcile. But I'm willing to forgive her hasty departure if she returns what belongs to me." Nadia felt something crack inside her chest at the casual lies, at the way he twisted what had happened into something palatable, something that made him the wounded party instead of the monster who destroyed her. Her hand pressed to her still flat belly, protective and desperate. "You're lying." The words burst from her before she could stop them, and suddenly every wolf in the room was staring at her again. "You rejected me in front of the entire pack. You called me unworthy and took another woman to bed while the bond burned away. You left me bleeding in the snow outside pack borders." "The emotional accusations of a woman scorned," Wulfric said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I understand you're upset, Nadia, but making wild claims doesn't help your case. Perhaps the pregnancy has affected your judgment." Raven's growl was inhuman, the sound of a wolf barely leashed. "You will not speak to her that way in my hall." "Then let's speak plainly, Alpha King." Wulfric's expression hardened, his mask of civility cracking to show the calculation beneath. "That child is mine by blood, my heir, and I'm prepared to go to war to claim what's rightfully mine, if necessary. Is one rejected female really worth conflict between our territories?" The threat hung in the air like poison. Nadia could see the council members exchanging glances, could smell their anxiety and concern. War was costly, brutal, and no alpha entered into it lightly. She felt Raven's conflict through the bond, his wolf howling to rip Wulfric apart for threatening what was his human mind calculating the cost to his pack if this escalated to full conflict. "The child is mine," she said, her voice stronger now, vibrating with a power she didn't know she possessed. "Mine alone, conceived in a bond that no longer exists. You have no claim, Wulfric Frostborn. You surrendered all rights when you rejected me." "The law is unclear on that point," one of the council members interjected, an older wolf with silver threading his dark hair. "Typically, a biological sire maintains certain rights regardless of bond status." "Unless the Luna's right is invoked," Raven interrupted, his eyes never leaving Wulfric's face. "An ancient law that allows a female to face her accuser directly, with the pack as witness. Truth spoken before witnesses, with the moon goddess herself as judge." Nadia's breath caught. She'd heard of the Luna's right in stories, in the old tales her mother used to tell, but she'd thought it was just legend. The way every wolf in the room suddenly went silent told her it was very real. "That law hasn't been used in generations," another council member protested. "It's archaic, barbaric." "It's pack law," Raven said flatly. Unless someone wishes to challenge that? No one spoke. Raven turned to her then, his hand finding her shoulder, his dark eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. This is your choice, Nadia. No one can force you to do this. If you invoke the Luna's right, you stand before the pack and speak your truth, and they judge who speaks honestly. But it's dangerous. If they believe Wulfric instead. He didn't finish the sentence, but she understood. If the pack judged her a liar, she would lose everything. Her position, her protection, possibly her life. She looked at Wulfric, at the smug certainty in his expression, at the way he stood there confident that his lies would be believed over her truth. Then she looked at Raven, at the faith in his eyes, at the way his hand trembled slightly where it rested on her shoulder, because he wanted to fight this battle for her, but was offering her the choice instead. Her wolf surged forward, fierce and maternal, rising to defend the small life inside her with ferocity that surprised even Nadia. This was her child, her future, her truth. And she would not let Wulfric Frostborn twist it into something ugly. I invoke the Luna's right, she said clearly, loud enough for every wolf to hear. I will speak truth before this pack, and let the moon goddess judge who is worthy. The assembly erupted into motion, chairs scraping back, wolves rising and moving to form a wide circle in the center of the dining hall. Raven's hand tightened on her shoulder for just a moment, a silent gesture of support and pride, before he stepped back to give her space. The council members arranged themselves at cardinal points around the circle, north, south, east, west, their roles as witnesses formalized by ancient tradition. Nadia took her place at the center, and Wulfric moved to stand opposite her, his expression showing the first crack of uncertainty she'd seen since he'd entered the hall. The eldest council member, a woman with white hair and eyes that had seen a century of pack politics, raised her hand for silence. When the room settled, she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of generations. By the Luna's right, invoked under the full moon's blessing, we gather to hear truth spoken. Nadia Darkhollow, you stand accused of fleeing with property belonging to Alpha Wulfric Frostborn. Speak your truth, and let the pack judge. Nadia's hands trembled, but she forced herself to meet the eyes of the wolves surrounding her. When she spoke, her voice was steady, clear, resonating with a power she hadn't known she could command. 4 days ago, I stood before my pack on what should have been my wedding night. Wulfric Frostborn was my mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself, and I loved him with everything I had. Her wolf rose to the surface as she spoke, lending strength to her words. But he didn't want me. He wanted power, wanted alliances, wanted a pretty ornament to legitimize his rule. When his preferred match became available, he rejected me publicly in front of every wolf in our pack. She held up her left wrist, showing the burned bond mark that still hadn't faded completely, the skin angry and scarred where the severed connection had seared her flesh. Several wolves in the circle drew sharp breaths at the sight, the rejection scar, unmistakable to any wolf who knew the old ways. Only a severed bond left such marks, the moon goddess's own testimony burned into flesh. It couldn't be self-inflicted, couldn't be faked. The pattern of scarring was as unique as a fingerprint and as damning as a confession. He called me unworthy, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. He said I wasn't good enough to stand beside him. And then he took Kira Silverclaw to his bed, while I knelt in the snow outside our den, feeling the bond burn away like acid in my veins. He left me there, bleeding and broken, and when I couldn't stand the pain anymore, I ran. I ran until I collapsed at the borders of this territory, and I would have died there if Alpha King Duskwalker's patrols hadn't found me. Lies, Wulfric spat, but his voice lacked conviction. She could smell his fear now, sharp and acrid beneath his cologne. The bond mark doesn't lie. Nadia cut him off, her voice ringing with alpha power that made several wolves step back in surprise. The moon goddess herself witnessed what you did. You rejected me, Wulfric Frostborn. You severed our bond and cast me out with nothing but the clothes on my back. The child I carry was conceived before that rejection, before you destroyed what the goddess gave us. You have no claim to this baby because you surrendered all rights when you chose power over your mate. The power of truth resonated through every wolf present, undeniable and absolute. She could see it in their faces, in the way they looked at Wulfric with dawning disgust, in the way the council members nodded slowly as they recognized honesty in her words. Is this true? The eldest council member turned to Wulfric, her voice hard as granite. Did you reject your mate and sever your bond? Wulfric's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a moment, Nadia thought he might continue lying, might try to twist the truth one more time. But the evidence was too clear, the bond mark too damning, and finally his mask cracked completely. She was weak, he snarled, all pretense of civility abandoned. Soft and submissive and completely unsuitable to be a Luna. The moon goddess made a mistake binding me to her. I corrected that error and chose a mate worthy of my status. The child she carries is mine by blood, and I will have my heir regardless of her feelings on the matter. The casual cruelty in his words, the utter lack of remorse, sent a ripple of shocked anger through the assembly. Even the visiting alphas who had no stake in this conflict looked at Wulfric with open contempt. Then you admit to rejecting your mate? The councilwoman's voice was ice. I admit to recognizing that some bonds are mistakes, Wulfric said. But that doesn't change biology. That child is mine, and I claim it as my heir. No. Nadia's voice cracked like a whip. You claim nothing. You are nothing to me, nothing to this child. You threw away your chance at fatherhood when you left me bleeding in the snow. Wulfric took a step toward her, his face twisting with rage. You don't get to decide that. You worthless. He lunged, crossing the space between them with inhuman speed, his hand reaching for her throat. Nadia stumbled backward, her arms wrapping protectively around her belly, her wolf snarling defiance even as human fear flooded her veins. But Raven was faster. He intercepted Wulfric mid-lunge, his fist connecting with Wulfric's jaw in a blow that sent the other alpha sprawling across the floor. When Wulfric scrambled to his feet, eyes flashing gold with his wolf rising to the surface, Raven was already standing between him and Nadia, his entire body radiating lethal intent. You just attacked my mate in my hall, Raven said, his voice utterly calm in a way that was more terrifying than any growl. That's a challenge, Frostborn, and I accept. Raven. Nadia started, but he glanced back at her, and the look in his eyes silenced her protest. This ends now, he said softly. One way or another. The circle of wolves immediately shifted, expanding to give the two alphas room, the ancient ritual of challenge taking over. No one would interfere now. This was between Raven and Wulfric, a fight for dominance, for territory, for the right to Nadia's choice. Wulfric shifted first, his body rippling and reforming into a massive white wolf with pale blue eyes. He was beautiful and deadly, all lean muscle and killing instinct, and he circled Raven with predatory focus. Even now, facing his own death, he moved with the confidence of an alpha who had never truly been challenged, never truly lost. Raven's shift was different, darker, more controlled, and somehow more terrifying for its precision. His wolf was pitch black with those same burning gold eyes, larger than Wulfric's by a significant margin, with scars crossing his muzzle that spoke of countless battles won. They circled each other for 3 heartbeats, 2 alphas measuring the distance between threat and strike. Then Wulfric feinted left and lunged right, going for the throat in a classic killing move that had probably ended dozens of lesser wolves. Raven caught him mid-air, jaws clamping around Wulfric's shoulder, and they crashed to the floor in a tangle of black and white fur. Blood sprayed across the stone. Wulfric twisted free with a howl of pain, spinning to slash his claws across Raven's flank. 4 parallel lines of red opened in the black fur. Nadia's hand flew to her mouth, a cry of fear catching in her throat. The bond pulsed with Raven's pain, but underneath it she felt only iron determination. Wulfric pressed his advantage, driving forward with a flurry of snapping jaws and raking claws. He was fast, faster than Nadia had ever seen him move. And for a terrible moment, she thought he might actually win, that her nightmare would never end. But Raven wasn't retreating. He was drawing Wulfric in. When Wulfric overextended on a lunge, Raven pivoted with impossible speed and caught him across the muzzle, a savage blow that sent the white wolf stumbling. Before Wulfric could recover, Raven was on him, driving him backward into the ring of watching wolves, who scattered to avoid being caught in the carnage. Wulfric found his footing and they clashed again. Fangs tearing flesh, blood matting their fur, neither giving ground. The assembled wolves watched in absolute silence, bearing witness to something primal and ancient. Two alphas fighting for the right to protect, to possess, to claim. Raven caught Wulfric's foreleg in his jaws and twisted. Bone cracked. Wulfric's howl of agony echoed off the vaulted ceiling, and he went down hard, his injured leg collapsing beneath him. He tried to rise, tried to keep fighting, but Raven was already there, massive paws pinning him to the blood-slicked floor, jaws locked around his throat with crushing pressure. Wulfric's pale eyes were wild now, rolling with something Nadia had never seen in them before. Fear. Raven's growl vibrated through the sudden silence. Through the pack link that connected all the wolves present, his voice was clear and absolute. Yield or die. Wulfric struggled beneath him, muscles straining against the hold. For a long moment the only sound was his ragged breathing, the wet wheeze of a wolf who knew he was beaten. Then his eyes found Nadia across the hall, and she saw something flicker there. Not quite regret, but perhaps recognition. A final understanding that his calculations had been wrong. That power wasn't everything. That he'd thrown away something precious for an alliance that had just cost him his life. I made you what you are. Wulfric's voice came through gritted fangs, blood bubbling from his throat where Raven's teeth pressed deeper. That fire in you, that strength, you never had it until I broke you. You should thank me. Nadia felt the words land like a blow, felt some small part of herself that still believed his lies start to waver. Then Raven's voice cut through, absolute and unwavering. You didn't make her strong. You revealed the strength that was always there, and now you die knowing you threw away the only thing that could have saved you. He tore out Wulfric's throat in one savage motion. The white wolf's body went limp, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes already going glassy. As death claimed him, his body shifted back to human form, leaving Wulfric Frostborn staring sightlessly at the vaulted ceiling, his expression frozen in eternal surprise. The assembled wolves roared their approval, the sound shaking the very walls of the dining hall. This was justice by pack law, witnessed and sanctioned, and no one would question the outcome. Raven shifted back to human form, blood staining his skin, breathing hard but steady. He crossed to Nadia in 3 strides, his hands framing her face, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? I'm fine, she whispered, her hands coming up to cover his, not caring that he was naked and bloody, that there was a corpse cooling on the floor behind him, that dozens of witnesses were watching this moment. You came for me. Always, he said fiercely. I will always come for you, Nadia. You are mine, and nothing, not threats, not challenges, not entire armies, will take you from me. The bond flared between them, golden and warm, singing with the rightness of his words. She had been so broken when she'd stumbled across his borders, so certain that she could never trust again, never feel safe again, never believe that a mate could be anything but pain. But standing there in his arms, surrounded by the pack that had accepted her judgment as truth, she felt something shift inside her chest, felt the last walls around her heart begin to crumble. Take me somewhere private, she whispered. Please. Understanding flashed in his eyes, followed immediately by a heat that made her breath catch. He swept her into his arms, carrying her through the assembly as the wolves parted to let them pass, and she buried her face against his neck, breathing in his scent of pine and earth and home. He carried her through corridors she didn't recognize, upstairs and through doorways, until finally he shouldered through a heavy wooden door into a massive chamber dominated by a bed piled with furs. His personal chambers, she realized, the Alpha King's private sanctuary. He set her down with infinite gentleness, his hands trembling slightly as he smoothed her hair back from her face. "Nadia, we don't have to— I want this," she interrupted, meeting his eyes steadily. "I want you, Raven. I want the bond completed. Want to be yours in every way that matters. If you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" His laugh was shaky, incredulous. "Nadia, I have dreamed of nothing else since the moment I saw you. But I need you to be sure. You've been through so much, and I can't." She silenced him by pulling him down to her, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something desperate and claiming. He groaned against her mouth, his control fracturing, his hands tightening on her waist. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she reached up and brushed her fingers along the strong line of his jaw. "I'm sure," she whispered. "Mark me, Raven. Make me yours." He shuddered at her words, his eyes flashing gold as his wolf surged forward. "Are you absolutely certain? Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be mine forever, bound to me in ways that can never be severed." "Good," she said simply. "I don't want to go back. I only want to go forward. With you." He kissed her again, slower this time, reverent, his hands moving to the fastenings of her dress with careful precision. She helped him, fumbling with the laces until finally the fabric pooled at her feet, and she stood before him wearing nothing but moonlight and courage. His gaze raked over her, hungry and possessive and somehow still tender. "You're so beautiful," he breathed, "so perfect." "I'm broken," she corrected softly. "No." He pulled her close, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "You're healing, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life helping you remember what it means to be cherished." He guided her backward until her legs hit the bed, then followed her down into the furs, his weight settling over her in a way that felt protective rather than confining. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and felt the exact moment his control finally snapped. He kissed a burning trail down her throat, his teeth scraping lightly over sensitive skin, and she arched into him with a gasp. Her wolf was howling inside her, desperate for this, desperate to be claimed and marked and made whole. "Tell me if it's too much," he murmured against her skin. "Tell me if you need me to stop." "Don't stop," she gasped. "Please, Raven, don't stop." He groaned, his hands mapping every curve of her body, learning what made her gasp and shudder. When he finally settled between her thighs, his eyes locked on hers, asking silent permission for this final step. She nodded, unable to form words, and he entered her slowly, carefully, giving her time to adjust to the stretch and fullness. It burned and ached and felt absolutely right, the bond between them pulsing with golden warmth as their bodies joined. He moved inside her with controlled precision, each thrust sending sparks of pleasure dancing along her nerve endings, and she clung to him desperately, her nails digging into his shoulders. The pleasure built and built, spiraling higher with each movement until she was gasping his name like a prayer. "Now," he growled against her ear, his voice rough with barely leashed wolf. "I need to mark you now, Nadia. Tell me you're ready." "Yes," she whimpered. "Please, yes." He struck fast, his fangs sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder where the mate mark belonged, and pain exploded through her in a white-hot wave that immediately transformed into overwhelming pleasure. The bond roared to life between them, no longer just warm, but blazing, golden light flooding through her veins as the connection snapped into place with devastating finality. She felt him inside her, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, his very soul pressed against hers. She felt his love, his possessiveness, his absolute commitment to protecting her and the life growing inside her. Felt herself becoming his in ways that transcended anything she'd experienced with Wulfric. When he released her throat, she didn't hesitate. Her wolf surged forward, lending her strength, and she sank her own teeth into his neck, marking him in return. His roar of pleasure-pain vibrated against her mouth as the bond completed with a snap that rocked them both, sending them tumbling over the edge into shared climax that left them both shaking and gasping. Mine. He breathed against her hair, his arms crushing her close as they rode out the aftershocks. You're mine, Nadia. Forever mine. Yours, she agreed, tears streaming down her face. But they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that came from joy rather than pain. Mate. Mate. He echoed, and she felt the word resonate through the completed bond, settling into place like the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. They held each other as the bond pulsed between them like a shared heartbeat, whole and right and forever. She could feel him in ways she'd never felt Wulfric, could sense his emotions as clearly as her own, could taste his absolute devotion in the back of her throat like honey and smoke. I love you, she whispered, surprised to discover the truth of it. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Raven Duskwalker. I love you too, he said fiercely, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. I think I started loving you the moment you looked at me with those defiant eyes and refused to be afraid. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Nadia, and I'm honored, humbled, that you chose me. She kissed him again, slower now, savoring the taste of him, the feel of him, the absolute rightness of being held in his arms. When they finally broke apart, she could see the first light of dawn beginning to paint the sky beyond the windows. A new day, a new life, a new chance at happiness she'd thought was lost forever. 3 days later, Raven declared her his Luna before an assembly that included not just Shadowpine's pack, but representatives from a dozen neighboring territories who had come to witness the challenge's aftermath. He stood before them all, his hand resting protectively over her still flat belly, and announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the great hall that she carried not just his mate bond, but also the future of Shadowpine. The assembled wolves roared their approval, and Nadia felt tears prick her eyes as she looked out over faces that held respect rather than pity, acceptance rather than judgment. Wulfric's former pack, leaderless and shamed by their alpha's actions, submitted to Shadowpine's authority without resistance. Kira Silvermane, the woman who had stolen Nadia's place, was found weeping in the alpha quarters, her incomplete bond with Wulfric leaving her neither widow nor mate. Just another casualty of his ambition. Raven left her fate to Nadia, and Nadia chose exile rather than execution. Let Kira live with what she'd helped destroy. Let her wander packless and know the loneliness she'd inflicted on others. Those who had treated Nadia with particular cruelty during her time among Frostborn were likewise exiled, forbidden to return on pain of death. The rest were absorbed into Shadowpine's territory, given new homes and new chances to prove their worth. The months that followed were a blur of adjustment and joy, and continued healing. Nadia learned to be Luna, to stand beside Raven as his equal and partner, to command respect from wolves who had once looked at her with contempt. The child grew inside her, strong and healthy, and Raven spent hours with his hand pressed to her swelling belly, talking to the daughter he claimed he could already sense through the bond. When she finally gave birth on a crisp autumn night 7 months after the challenge, with Raven holding her hand and the pack's healers surrounding them both, Nadia held her daughter in her arms and felt only peace where the burned bond had once left scars. The baby had her dark hair and, impossibly, miraculously, Raven's gold eyes. The healers whispered that they'd never seen such a thing, that the mate bond must have claimed the child as thoroughly as it had claimed Nadia herself. Whatever blood had started her existence, Lyra was Raven's daughter in every way that mattered. Shadowpine's princess and living proof that broken things could heal, that second chances existed, that the moon goddess sometimes rewrote destiny itself. They named her Lyra, after the constellation that had been visible the night Nadia stumbled across Shadowpine's borders. And when Raven wrapped his arms around them both, pressing a kiss to Nadia's temple while Lyra slept peacefully between them, Nadia finally understood what it meant to be home. Years later, when Lyra was old enough to ask about the scar on her mother's wrist, Nadia would tell her the truth about rejection and survival, about finding strength in darkness, about a love that forged itself in fire and emerged stronger than anything that had tried to break it. But on that autumn night, standing on the balcony overlooking Packlands that were finally, truly hers, with Raven's arms around them both and the completed mate bond humming contentedly in her chest, Nadia simply closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of pine and earth and forever. She had been broken. She had been rejected. She had been cast out and left for dead. But she had survived. She had fought. She had chosen to trust again. And in the end, that choice had given her everything she'd ever needed. A mate who cherished her, a daughter who would never know rejection, and a love that would last until her final breath and beyond. The burned bond had left scars, yes, but those scars were proof that she had survived, that she had endured, that she was stronger than anything that had tried to destroy her. And as Raven tightened his arms around her and whispered, "I love you," against her hair while their daughter slept peacefully between them, Nadia finally, completely, let go of the past and embraced the future that stretched before them, bright and golden and absolutely perfect.